free at last. I'll be so free at last. Great God Almighty, I'll be free at last. To let my feelings lie where harm cannot come by, and hurt this always hurting heart that needs to rest a while. It'll be like eagle's wing, they ride upon the wind. It'd be the sweetest taste of freedom for my soul, and I'd be free at last. So free at last. Great God Almighty, I'll be free at last. Oh, I'll be free at last. So free at last. Good God Almighty, I'll be free at last. We have 2 black churches in the community. Oh, yeah. I don't want you to applause, I want you to we have 2 black historical churches in our community. One of them is Bonner Chapel United Methodist Church. That's the oldest black church in Kerrville. It was established in 1897. My great uncle established that church. His name was John Fifer. He helped establish the church. He was a circuit rider. His circuit went from Bandera to Kerrville to Fredericksburg. One day he just rode off on his horse and never came back. Never knew what happened to him. When I was in college, there was a guy that was on the basketball team, and he asked me if my name was Fifer. I played football and ran track. He asked me if my name was Fifer. I said, yeah. He said, well, I'm dating your cousin. I said, no, you ain't dating my cousin. And he said, yes, I am. And they lived in Houston. He said, her name is Darlene Fifer, spell it F-I-F-E-R, just like you spell your name. I said, I don't know nothing about no Darlene Fifer. He said, well, I'm going to call her and we're going to see. So he called her, and we talked for about 30 minutes on a payphone. That's way before cell phone. And come to think of it, that we thought that we were kin. Well, the first off week we had, our family was, my baby brother was playing football at the University of Houston, so we went up there to see them play, and sure enough, we met Darlene and her family. And do you know what? Everything matched up. They look like we look, they act like we act, they talked like we talked, and all of their names match up to every name that we had. And the only thing that we could think of was Great Uncle John, tried to duplicate what he had.
How about that?
Wow. Anyway, Kerrville was established in 1897. We just celebrated 125 years in November. That was a division between 3 years or 5 years later, 6 years later. There was a division between the Methodist Church. You see, everybody with the Methodist Church were majority kinfolk. And so they had a dispute. And so the ones that were disputing, they decided that they were going to go off and start their own church. And what's the opposite of the Methodist? Baptist. So they started Mount Olive Baptist Church in 1903. And Mount Olive will be celebrating soon. We'll be celebrating their anniversary as well. So this is part of the historical part of the churches in the community. The churches then played a major role in what happened in the community, and the preachers had a large part in that, much like they do today, and still continues. The second largest influence, well, the first largest influence in the black community was Doyle. Doyle was a school that was established by Miss Doyle. That was before Miss Doyle got here, though, and that's a school that you don't hear much about. And it was called Cabbage Hill. And Cabbage Hill was called the Colored Church. Now, if you're coming down Shriner Street, on the right-hand side, you'll see a big tin building. It used to be a buttercrust bread place where they sold the bread at. But right behind that were the railroad tracks. And right behind that was a huge clump of trees. And sitting right in the middle of those huge clump of trees was a little bitty white, one-room white building, and that was called Cabbage Hill. The principal at Cabbage Hill was a man by the name of Mr. Wheat. Do you know that we can't find any information on Mr. Wheat? They can't even find the location of Cabbage Hill because we've looked for it on any other title, in any other title companies. And the building, have no idea where it went. But because of older people in the community, that's why it's so valuable for grandparents to teach their young to ask questions of their elders, because that's where a whole lot of that forgotten history or that lost history is going to come from. So we had a lot of people, they've all died out now, but we had a lot of people in the community who was willing to share that lost information with those that seemed to be interested. Well, of course, after Cabbage Hill, Miss Doll came on the scene around 1930, and she noticed that there really wasn't a building for black kids to go to school. Well, they were going to school. They were going to school in the churches. Those were the schoolhouses. You see, the church then, as now, still plays a major role in any small community. Doesn't matter what your culture is, that church plays a large role in that. So the school was going on, and Miss Doll came, and so she purchased a building and purchased some property, and then with the help of other entities, they purchased a building, and that became the colored school. It wasn't named Doll then. It wasn't called Doll until 1941 when B.T. Wilson, have you ever heard that name before, B.T. Wilson, outside of the school? B.T. Wilson came to Kerrville, and when B.T. Wilson came to Kerrville, the face of the black school changed completely. You know, he was an innovator. He was a musician. He was an orator. He was a mathematician. Just about anything you wanted Prof to be, he was that, except a preacher. He didn't do much preaching. But anything else, he could do it. And one of the first things that he did when he was here, he wrote the school alma mater. Purple and white, a Doyle High School will make you go right, never break a rule. We'll fight with all our might, our spirits never cool. For the purple and white of Doyle High School. When he first got here, he wrote that song. The kids sang that song every day. Of course, Pearl Harbor happened, 12/7/41. So Prof sit at the piano when that happened after he heard about it, and he wrote a song called 12/7/41. The students at Doyle sang that song to show patriotism. They sang that song every day until the war was over. Because of our interaction with the older people that are still alive from that era, we have the words to 12/7/41. And I wish I knew the song, but I don't. When Prof came here, he established more community than the church did. He established what we call a May Day. And it was a fun day at the end of school. Now, May Day came from Europe, but Prof brought it over here. And our May Day consisted of the wrapping of a maypole. Have any of y'all seen a maypole wrap? Mm-hmm. Have you participated in a maypole wrap? Yeah, it's fun. You have? Yes, it's a lot of fun. We hope to recreate that this year. It's a men's group at Doyle, and we meet every other Tuesday night. And it's called Healthy Men Harvesting Hope. So we are hoping, with the help of others in the community, to recreate our May Day. People would bring out baskets and boxes of home-cooked foods and desserts. They would sit them out, and everybody would eat. We'd all meet at Doyle. And then after all the eating was over with, they would end up in the park, Carver Park, which I'll get to later. And they would have foot races, sack races, softball games, baseball games, and the best thing about that whole thing, there was a game called Fat and 40. You had to be fat and over 40 before you played. So anybody could play in, and that was a sight to see. Prof was a mathematician, so he prepared each one of those kids to learn math. I wish I would have had this class, but that's my poorest subject. At Doyle, there were 6 teachers. 5 had master's degrees. 1 had a doctor's degree. Miss Etta Cheeks. She taught English. If you could, and hopefully with the Voices of Doyle, because we still have 3 or 4 more interviews to do, whenever Allison, his daughter, gets a little bit more time. The stories that they tell about B.T. Wilson are phenomenal. And the stories that they tell about their learning is even more impressive. Everyone who went to college say the same thing, and they're not interviewed at the same time. They say that when they went to college, their professors were surprised and shocked that the kids from little old bitty Kerrville knew more than the kids that came from the city. Pretty impressive. Pratt was here until integration in 1964, and he moved over to Tybee High School, and there he became a science teacher. Some of the other things that he did, one of the things that he did was, I thought was pretty impressive, and we have a picture of that, and I should have brought the picture with me. He always played around with writing songs, and he wrote a song for Louis Jordan, a big band, and that song was called Chicky Mo, Crane and Crow. The Sentimental Journey Orchestra plays that song almost every time they go out in honor of B.T. Wilson. Louis Jordan recorded it. It was on the flip side of Beans and Cornbread. So, Doyle was a major factor in the life of the black community and in Kerrville. Mayor Blackburn is sitting here. Mayor Blackburn was really instrumental in getting Doyle to become a community center. I mean, some folks have a passion about doing things. And when he came to Kerrville, his passion was helping where he was living. And that included the black community, which had oftentimes been neglected. And he went to the Capitals along with some other people, and they were able to get a grant to purchase the building from the school. And the life of Doyle Community Center began. It extended on through the day. We were able to get a grant from Hope for Health, along with Peterson Hospital and some other entities. And those grants were able to do a complete renovation of the Doyle building. If you haven't been to the Doyle building, please come by and we'll give you a tour at no charge to you. Well, come on by and we'll give you a tour. The director of our board is Ms. Sigerman. Raise your hand so they can see.
And I'm happy to be so.
And George is one of our board members, Mr. Perot. And George is also a huge volunteer at all. Anything that we need done, from tech to hauling chairs to digging a ditch, George is always there. You do everything we give him money. I got to talk to him about it. For the sake of time, I'm going to leave Doyle and I'm going to go into the baseball. Another defining factor in the life of integration was sports. Doyle had a great professional, I am going to talk about this at Doyle. They had a great athletic team, as well as having a choir. The choir was renowned. This is a time when people could not stay in hotels. If you went to a place, you had to go and stay at a gym, or you had to stay at somebody's house. Because there just wasn't room for a black person during those times to have the same commodities that someone else had. But B.T. Wilson's choir and his band went all over the state of Texas playing music and singing. Not having a proper place to stay was not a deterrent. Their athletic team was bar none. They had a great basketball program. Coach Williams was the basketball and football and baseball coach. They didn't have a track team because they didn't have a track to run around. But I will tell you a story about that in a minute. They had in 1956, they finally got enough young men to start a football team again, and they persuaded Prop to do that. Well, when school started, that's when they started practicing. There were 5 7th graders on that team because they didn't have enough to fill the team out. I think they ended up with 15 people, so they only had like 2 or 3 for subs, and they had to be able to play any position because you never know who was going to go down. Well, that year, they went to the district, and they were playing people like Waco Moore, San Antonio Wheatley, Austin Johnston, Brownwood, Brady, places that were a little bit larger than they were at the time. And they won the district that year, which was a feather in their hat. Also in 1956, there was a fire in Doyle. And there was a man by the name of Mr. Jim Butler. He worked for the city, and he was the city foreman. He was the city foreman. He worked in the trash department, in the garbage department. And he came out of his house, which was right across the street, and he saw a glow in Doyle that he hadn't seen before. So he woke up his son and told him to run down to the famous door and talk to Mr. Brafton and tell him to call the fire department because Doyle was about to burn up. Well, the fire started from a pot-bellied stove in November that was on all night so they could have warmth when they came there the next day. The fire took place in the attic, and it was glowing. When they were doing the reconstruction, you could see all the charred wood lumber that was still up there. It was still strong and good, but it was pretty well charred. So Fred Butler Jr. got out, didn't have any shoes on. Back then there was no pavement in the road. There was potholes and rocks as big as your hands and as small as a pin that he had to run on. Boogity, 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 boogity. He ran down to the famous door, knocked on the door, woke up Mr. Bratcher. Mr. Bratcher wasn't too happy from what I understand. But when he told him that door was on fire, that changed everything. That was the closest phone, was down the famous door. It's probably 150 yards away. So Mr. Bratcher got on the phone, called the fire department. They came over. They put the fire out, but the school was destroyed. You couldn't hold classes in the school. So they held them in the churches again. 1st through 6th grade was at Barnard Chapel. 7th through 12th grade was at Mount Olive. But all the extracurricular activities, Dall kept. And it was pretty impressive. Baseball field, Kerrville Park. Kerrville Park was established in 1941. And it was a collaboration between the city and the people of Kerrville, of the community members in Kerrville. The city paid the majority of the money. The citizens in Kerrville took a collection and they paid the rest of the money. They had 1 week to get the park together. That means to clear it out. It was nothing but thick cedar, hackberry, mesquite, and oak. And in 1 week, they cleared that park. They had an area for a playground and an area to play baseball in. And incidentally, they won the game. Kerrville Park has always played a large part in the community of Kerrville. It was a site for recreation. There were things that you couldn't do in Kerrville, a lot of things, like in most integrated situations. But in Kerrville, you could go to the city parks, but it just made it convenient to have your own park in your own community. And that's what Kerrville Park was. And it still plays a vital part in the community today. The city has invested a whole lot of time and a whole lot of money in beautifying George Washington Kerrville Park. We have a Glory Community Garden. Glory Community Garden is the only successful community garden in the city of Kerrville. And it was established by Reverend Noah, who's no longer our minister, retired. He's still on the board at Glory Community Garden. When he got here, we had this vacated property. And it had been suggested before, but none of the other ministers ever took action on it. So he, like all the other ministers, he asked, what can we do with this vacated property? And again, I responded, let's do a garden. I didn't know anything about gardening, but it sounded like a cool idea. Other cities were doing it. And so he took action. He checked into it. He found out that there were master gardeners here. So he joined them at the advice of some of the people on the board. He joined the master gardeners. He got involved in it. They got involved in it. And we were able to raise money to put a fence around it. Well, first of all, we built beds. We built them 1 cinder block high, and then we built 4 cinder block high, so the older people wouldn't have to bend over and hurt themselves. Then we were able to put a fence around it. And all this came from donations, because there was no money. Everything was done on faith, grace, and mercy. And that's a good thing to depend on. Matter of fact, when my money get low, I'm still faith, grace, and mercy. So they were able to put the beds in, vegetable beds in, build a fence. We got we call it a shed, but it's supposed to be a garden center. So we have a little garden center, and we put up a pavilion where we have all of our programs under, which is a very nice spot. If you haven't been to Glory Community Garden, please come by. They are not planting right now, but the planting season will start in March. And about April, that garden will be so full of plants, all kinds of plants, flowers, vegetables. People grow okra this high. And if they don't pick them, I just let them dry and I make Christmas ornaments out of them. They have watermelons and cantaloupes, green beans. What's those purple things called? Eggplants. Yeah, I got in trouble because this lady said, "Oh, you can take all the eggplants you want." So I told somebody else, and they stripped them. She let me know about it in church in front of everybody else. So I don't offer nobody else plants to anybody. They grow a whole variety of stuff in the garden. But the best thing about the garden is it brought a whole new class of people to the community. People that would have never come to the community or never interacted with people of color without the garden. That's the beauty of a garden. How can you hate your person when you're digging in the same dirt they digging in? Pretty difficult. Pretty difficult. Back to the Kerbal All Stars. They had a wonderful team. The manager was a man by the name of Mr. Bill Haynes. Now, Mr. Bill Haynes played in the Negro National Baseball League. He pitched alongside Leroy Satchel Paige. He played on the same team, the Monarchs. The stories that he told were unbelievable. When he died, he had about 4 or 5 scrapbooks that he had. Well, his sons didn't know what they were, and they put them out for the trash department to pick up. I was a little old kid. I got on my bicycle once I heard he did that, and I went up there, but the garbage truck beat me. So, yeah, all that history just went down the drain. I mean, it was amazing. There was a man here by the name of Mr. Joe Lewis. Reverend knows him, and Mr. Joe Lewis kept a lot of that history alive, because every time he had the opportunity, he would talk about his exploits playing with the Kerbal All Stars. The Kerbal All Stars were not just a baseball team, it was also a basketball team. And what's important about them playing basketball under the Kerbal All Stars name, they were an integrated basketball team. And together they won, it was semi-pro, but they won many, many area tournaments because they knew or they learned how to play together. Kerbal All Stars center field was about 450 yards, 500 yards deep. I saw 2 people hit the ball over the fence. One was my dad, and the other one was a man that we call Uncle Roy Neal. Both of them were left-handed. Well, at one time, Kerbal All Stars could fill out a baseball team with all left-handers. So those are the 2 that hit it over 450 yards deep. From the Kerbal All Stars, there are lots of people that I thought may have been able to play in the pros, because to us they were just that good. But conditions weren't right, times weren't right. But in 1965, they did draft a young man from the Kerbal All Stars. His name was Hugo McCoy. The Giants were in New York. They came to Fredericksburg, Texas to meet him, and they met Mr. Joe Lewis, and they asked Mr. Joe Lewis, did they know this boy named Hugo McCoy? Mr. Joe Lewis said, yeah, that's my best friend. What do you want with him? And he said, well, we're scouts from a professional baseball team, and we like to look at him. So Mr. Joe went over and told Hugo, and Hugo was a young man, 6'5". He was throwing 95 miles per hour. The only other person in the pros that was throwing 95 per hour that we know of was Sandy Koufax. So they came, they watched Hugo play, and that same day, they talked with him and they signed him to a contract. Within the week, Hugo was left and he was in New York. Well, they had to cut him because Hugo hadn't been out of Kerrville much. And he got up there at Harlem with all those pretty black women and they couldn't keep him in camp. So they had to cut him. The next year they came back, the Giants were in San Francisco, and they got him again. They re-signed him. And of course, he had to play in the Triple A League. He made every practice. Everything went well, except for the first game. The first game, he didn't show up. And that was unlike him. So they went and they looked for him, and they couldn't find him anywhere where they thought that he might be hanging out, and they went to his hotel. And they found him there laying in the bed. He had OD'd. No one knew he was on drugs. It happened. But everybody remembers Hugo McCoy and the fastballs that he could throw. Couldn't throw a curve, but boy, he could throw a hard one. At Doyle, probably the best known athlete to come out of Doyle was a man by the name of Jesse Van Stokes. His family were cowboys. They're originally from Concord. There was no school in Concord. So he came up here to go to school, and then the family moved up here. Now, Concord, Centerpoint, Bernie, all had a pretty good number of black people living there. Of course, Kerrville was the largest city. So any of those people, and even in Fredericksburg, they would come here to go to school at Doyle. Well, Jesse, he grew up here at Doyle, and man, like I said, he was a great athlete. He got a scholarship to go to Corpus Christi. And how he got to go to Corpus Christi was this coach wanted him really bad. There was no film to be shown. He just heard about Jesse and Jesse's ability to run. So he came to Kerrville, and the prophet was out in the field. We call it the sticker bowl, because as kids, that's where we played. And you didn't want to get tackled because it was full of stickers. So you learned how to run around with stickers.
You okay?
And so the coach called the prophet, came to Kerrville, and Jesse and the prophet were standing out in the sticker bowl, and the grass was about this high. And they were standing there, and the coach asked, he said, Mr. Wilson, how fast is this boy? And the prophet said, well, I don't know, because we don't have a stopwatch. And then the coach said, well, we really can't take him if we don't know how fast he is. Well, the prophet said, I can solve that. He said, Bonehead, come here. And that's what the prophet called everybody. He said, Bonehead, come here. So Jesse came over there, and he said, see that rabbit over there? Go get it. Well, Jesse took off running. Boogity, 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 boogity. And within 30 yards, he had scooped that rabbit up, brought it back to the coach petting it, and the coach said, I want it. That's how Jesse got to go to Corpus Christi and play. Now it's a branch of A&M. When Jesse graduated from college, he got signed by Bud Grant of the Minnesota Vikings in 1965. And he went through 2 days, was fine. He was starting. He was a defensive back. He was going to be a punt and kickoff returner and run back punt and play corner. But he wanted to come home, and Bud Grant tried to talk him out of him, but he didn't. For some reason, he let Jesse come. And Jesse was supposed to be here 1 week. And that was the first Mustang I had seen up close and personal. He had a 1965 black Mustang. And he came to Kerrville, and he stayed 1 week, and he stayed 2 weeks, and he stayed 3 weeks. And Bud Grant called his mom and said, if you don't get back, they're going to cut him. So he was on his way back, and he had a wreck. Totaled that 1965 Mustang, and of course they cut him. He played with the San Antonio Toros for several years, and he had a chance to play with the Denver Broncos on 3 or 4 of those years. The last chance he got it was at the age of 34. He was 38 years old. And he had the team won, and he didn't show up for practice the last day. He was going to make the team. Jesse Van Stokes. Juke joints. We had 7 juke joints in Kerrville. Now, the black community was about 3/4 of a mile wide, maybe the same in length, and so it wasn't very big. But we had 7 juke joints. There was the Green Door, Miss Ella Phelps, the Dreams, the Cabin, the Famous Door, Hilly Frazier's, and there was an Hispanic juke joint, and it was called John Silver's. Now, as a kid, that's what we went to John Silver's a lot of the times because it was closer when we got out of the sticker bowl and playing ball. Because you went to John Silver's, and for 25 cents, you got a big piece of salami, cheese, pickles, crackers, 3 or 4 moon cookies, and a soda water. So that's what we ate afterwards, and I'm sure it cost more than 25 cents. He just gave it to us. John Silver's was so dark on the beer jar part that no kids could go in there. Well, while the other kids were talking to John Silver's, I went in there and snuck in there to take a look, and all I could see was smoke. Couldn't see nothing else. But that was the 7 juke joints. The most popular of those juke joints, some people say it was the Famous Door. You've heard of it. Some people say it was the Famous Door. I dispute that. The Famous Door became popular after integration. Before integration, it was the Pleasure Garden. That property adjoined still on Community Center. And what's on that property right now are 3 slabs. Mr. Hilly Frazier, everybody called him Uncle Hilly, he owned the Pleasure Garden. And he also barbecued. He had the best barbecue in the region. There was on any given day, you would see license plates from San Antonio, Austin, Bernie, Fredericksburg, anywhere, coming there just to get his barbecue. And it was all day long. He opened at 11, he closed at midnight. You would see cars with different license plates there waiting to get their barbecue. And when he sold out, it was out. And I think what made his barbecue so good was his sauce. And there was only 2 people I know of that has his sauce. Vernon Brown, who was our local artist, and Mr. Joe Lewis. He still has the recipe of that sauce. Well, at the Pleasure Garden, whenever there were big blues out in San Antonio or Austin, well, Uncle Hilly and his brother would go to San Antonio or Austin and talk them into coming to Kerrville. So there were people that played in the pleasure garden who were well-known blues artists. Now those slabs that they had, this barbecue slab was a 9 by 15. The building was a 15 by 39, and those slabs are still there. And where you danced outside, it was a 58 by 38. And a large area to dance on. And then on the side of that was, a little area where you could walk in, but it was dirt on both sides. And that's where they would put the tables. Now surrounding those slabs was an 8'10" fence. And surrounding the 8'10" fence were chinaberry trees and hackberry trees and oak trees. And whenever those big blues stars came, because kids weren't allowed in the pleasure garden, except 2 o'clock on one day every week, where you went in to skate. He closed it down. And at 4 o'clock, he ran everybody out. So whenever those big blues stars came, we would climb them. They would. I only did it one time. I was too scared of my daddy. We would climb up in the trees, look over that tin fence, just to get a glimpse of those blue stars that were there. And there were people like Fats Domino that came here, Big Mama Thornton, Gatemouth Brown, B.B. King came here. Get out of that bed, wash your face and hands. Get out of that bed, wash your face and hands. Get in that kitchen, make noise with them pots and pans. I said, shake, rattle, and roll, ooh, baby. Shake, rattle, and roll, shake, rattle, and roll, yeah. Shake, rattle, and roll. Girl, you won't do right to save your doggone soul. Big Joe Turner. And there are lots of other bluesmen that I don't know, because I was way too young to do it. I think the person I saw was Gatemouth Brown, I think, when I looked over there. And that was the only time I looked over there. But there were lots of blues stars that came to Kerrville. And even though I was old enough, I don't know if I would have sense enough to have gotten an autograph. But Kerrville was a musical, athletic, spiritual scene. The famous door. What was this? It was before the famous door became the famous door. It was a grocery store. And then from the grocery store, it became a grocery store, restaurant, beer joint. And then Mr. Bratcher bought it, and he turned it into a restaurant and a juke joint. Just like the pleasure garden, he would bring in entertainers. But he did more of the local entertainment. If there were bands in the area, then he would hire them to come to the famous store. Every once in a while, he would get an offshoot band to come in here, like somebody that were imitating the Temptations. They would bring them who had some vinyls out that he would get to come into the famous store. The famous door was recognized for its steaks. By far, it had the best steaks around. The cabin was just right down, it's all on Barnett Street. So if you went down maybe 200 yards from the famous store, on the right-hand side was a cabin. You couldn't miss it, because if you